house today.
Yeah, we got 24 in right now. We should have some more joining us. And in any case, thanks everyone for joining us today. This is Score Main, and we are presenting on funding your business. Score is a partner of the SBA, and we're joined today by Joe and Julie. Joe Powers, Julie Viola. They are experts on the topic. And today's presentation is also sponsored by Gorham Savings Bank.
All right.
And if you guys haven't already, feel free to cue some questions in the chat, and maybe put your business name in there, and we can go from there. As well as if you have questions, you can either put it in the chat or utilize the raise hand function found in the React window.
Great. Thanks, Jasper.
Of course.
All right. All right. Well, we'll take it from here. Just shout if you can't see this, but I should be showing the slides here. And yeah, as Jasper says, that feel free to interrupt with questions. We will hopefully have some time at the end for some Q&A. We generally shoot for roughly an hour for running through these slides, and then there should be, like I said, plenty of time after that. So don't hesitate to jump in, interrupt if there's jargon that you don't understand. I'm guilty of that for sure. So feel free to interrupt. But otherwise, let's jump in here. And Julie and I will introduce ourselves in a second. And Julie, if you want to just let me know, or Jasper, if you're hanging around, if there are comments that come up when I'm talking, let me know, as I may not see those, and I'll do the same when you're talking.
I'll keep my eyes peeled
So,
for
all right,
sure.
Okay, sounds good. As Jasper mentioned, the two presenters for this workshop are Julie and myself. We're going to talk a little bit about ourselves at the bottom of this slide, but just first, the introduction here is for those of you who don't know Score well. Maybe this is your first touch with Score. This is an organization that spans the entire country. There are local chapters, roughly 300 chapters all over the country. And essentially, it does two core functions. One is workshops on particular subjects of interest with respect to business, and then it also is with all of you. Also is a large mentor network. So in the local main chapters, there are volunteers that work with anyone who comes to Score to help them with their businesses, whether it's an idea or it's a business you've had for 10 years or anything in between. So if you don't know about that mentorship side, highly recommend you to take advantage of it. The format today is a workshop, as I mentioned. So this is, and as Jasper mentioned, this is about funding your business. So we'll talk about different types of capital, and other resources. And then, and at the outset, we also will introduce ourselves now. And then I would say, while we're introducing ourselves, or you're at the beginning here of this webinar, if you can put in the chat maybe your first name and what in one sentence with the business idea or the actual business that you're running, that would be great, because then we can all get a sense of who's in the room, and Julie and I can hopefully sort of customize a little bit depending on what we see there. So go ahead and do that. And while you're doing that, I'll just say for myself, Joe Powers, I am the managing director at Maine Venture Fund, which is a state-sponsored entity in Maine that invests in Maine-based companies. And the type of investment that we do is called equity investing, and we'll talk more about that later on. But basically, it's buying part ownership in the businesses in which we invest. So it's a really hands-on, in the trenches type of investing. It's not for every business, as we'll talk about, but we invest across all different industries and usually sort of early stage. So that's my background, and I also have been in a bunch of different startups myself, so I have some lived experience on the entrepreneurial side of things. That's me. Julie, do you want to introduce yourself?
You bet. Just got to find the mute button. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julie Viola. I'm a commercial lender here at Gorham Savings Bank. I have the privilege of managing the small business banking group. So in our group, we do a lot of things on, just about any size business, but oftentimes a lot of the SBA lending, whether it's SBA 7A or SBA 504, comes through my house. But also being a lifelong Portlander, have seen a lot of different businesses come and go, and I'm super passionate about financial literacy and helping businesses navigate this funding piece. Is it borrowing? Is it equity? Is it bootstrapping? Some of the things we'll talk about today. Super important topics to me, and I'm really grateful to SCORE to be here to share some information and some advice. And I also, full disclosure, I'm a treasurer for the main venture fund board as well. So Joe and I get a chance to work together on some other projects. But working in this space with businesses is something that no two businesses are the same. No two financing approaches are the same. So hopefully you're here today to ask questions and take in some information so that we can help you navigate and guide yourselves through the process.
All right.
We do have some of the people introducing themselves in the chat. If you guys would like to run down the list a little bit.
Yeah.
So, I can, obviously.
Right. Yeah. So we've got Patricia, who's doing real estate investing. Kathy has a business idea around a Christ-centered recovery center. Wayne has 18 acres of a sober living campground in Cornish. We've got Nick, who's got Peace House Studio, which is a clothing brand, it seems. Jaylene, owner of Get Cozy Maine, Day Spa. Krista, Cold Current Kelp. Kate, artist, starting an art career, ways to fund the street. Matt and forestry. Amy and warehousing distribution. Julie with Roots Up, empowering children. Joe with an orchard, apple cider, design, crochet. Rachel working with multiple businesses, automotive, construction, real estate, etc. Laura, nonprofit, fine arts and music. That's very cool. Dylan, custom metal fabrication. Eliza, crisis recovery services and a spa. So interesting, some overlap and also some real sort of diverse stages of business. Darlene recently moved from Burundi and looking for work and have some business ideas around restaurants. So great, keep those coming if you don't mind. And again, and then you can all see who's in the room. But again, don't be shy about raising your hand with questions. So I move on to just framing.
Cutting out.
Yeah, Joe, you're breaking up a little bit occasionally.
Okay. All right, let me just double check my Wi-Fi connection. Sorry about that.
All good. Happens sometimes.
Okay.
But
I may, yeah, maybe I'll just sort of move to get closer to the router. But as I do that, forgive the moving background here. So the framing up the talk today, we're gonna talk about the following things. So we'll do a little bit of grounding in startup funding, the realities of what this process is and how to go about it. Bootstrapping, we'll introduce the idea of bootstrapping, the all-important term, and define that. And then we talk through grants, loans, and equity. These are all different types of funding capital. And then we'll talk about different sources and resources. As far as how to find a SCORE mentor, we'll just take care of that right now. That's quite easy. You can just go to score.org. You can find your local chapter and reach out and let them know what you're working on, and they'll match someone for you if you want to do that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the direction in which we're headed today. And hopefully the Wi-Fi is a little bit better. By the way, how has that been over the last 60 seconds or so? Is that connection a little bit better, stronger?
Much better. Yeah, you didn't no choppiness here now.
Okay, great. All right. So as we mentioned at the outset, we're talking about sort of the realities of startup funding. And I think the way that we talk about this in a little greater detail is just sort of what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? And you're potentially self-selecting into this journey. And for some people, it's a really natural fit, and others not so much. And how do you know whether it's a fit? Well, some of the things that you want to consider down this path. This is not necessarily just specific to funding, but more the lifestyle of an entrepreneur. Think about the idea of working independently, which might be, the upside of that obviously is you have autonomy. The downside is there's not much structure, and so you have to create that for yourself. Thinking about what you love to do, what you don't love to do, how that overlaps with the type of business that you're working on. The idea of selling, every entrepreneur actually needs to have a real strong sales bone in their body, and so that's something that I think you've got to get comfortable with. There are really no sort of formal vacation days, sick days, benefits. Financial uncertainty is always part of it. Thinking about when you're taking on or considering taking on debt, what your repayment history has been in the past is something to consider. And generally, no matter what type of funding, whether it's a grant, a loan, or equity, you're going to be sharing a lot of personal financial information, even though this is a business transaction. So you have to be comfortable with that. And then at the end of the bullet point list here, understanding the numbers is really important. And Julie will emphasize this as well. And this is something that takes some time to understand and build as a skill set. So if you don't have if you don't have sort of financial literacy now, that's okay, but it is definitely something to spend time on. And that's a skill that can be built through SCORE. There's other workshops around understanding financials and financial literacy in general. There's other online courses. There's lots of different resources. So that's something that you definitely want to focus on, because it's I should just say, it's not just about having a skill set so that you can check the box. It's really the only way that how the health of your business, what type of money or capital that you need, and then it's the only really way that you have confidence that you'll be able to pay that debt back, or comply with the requirements of the investment. So we can talk more about that, but it's a super important point. And then another dose of reality for the startup funding world is there's no free money, which is a sort of maybe a common myth. And if you ask most small business owners, most of them will say, well, I used personal savings. A lot of them got loans. Friends and family comes up often, personal credit cards, and those can get a little dangerous if you over leverage them. But they're used often. And sometimes you're pulling in a business partner who's part of the funding. There's taking out a second mortgage on your home. That's this gets again into the realm of be careful, but again, it's people do that. And crowdfunding, this is a little bit dated now. It's 2016, this poll, so it was only 3%, but I think that's number is probably a lot higher now. And we'll talk a little bit about crowdfunding platforms later, but there's a whole module on crowdfunding within SCORE if you're interested in that. There's a great sort of teaser on it that gives you a sense of what it takes to do a crowdfunding campaign. So I encourage you, if you're thinking about that, to learn more about it there. All right, so now into the meat of the presentation. I'm just going to check the chat here, and I promise I will let Julie do some talking, so you don't have to hear about me droning on the whole time. But we'll kind of hand the mic off back and forth here a little bit. So just a quick dip into the chat. We've got Dylan, cultivating medicinal mushrooms, Karen, fractional CFO, Darlene. I guess we mentioned some of those. Darlene's coming from Burundi. Nate has an AI data startup. Candace, design crochet. We heard from Candace a little bit earlier, but and then Dam Garden with a gift shop. So awesome to see everybody in here. All right, then we've got a comment that says, apologies if you already said at the top of the call, will the slides be shared at the end? Yes, they will. So yeah, don't feel like you feverishly need to write all this stuff down, but feel free to take notes, obviously, outside the margins if it's helpful. All right, keep those. And then Emily with mental health counseling, welcome, Emily. Feel free to keep those coming, and also any questions or clarifications. So, all right, so where do I look for cash? This is why you came to the workshop today, most likely. So we're going to talk about different sources of cash, or capital as it's sometimes called. And we bucket this into 4 categories: bootstrapping, grants, debt, and equity. And Julie, you and I have switched the order around of these a little bit over time. And I think this one, just as a reminder, I'll start out with bootstrapping. I'll hand over to you for grants and debt, and then you hand back to me for equity. Does that work?
Yep,
Sorry.
you bet. Sure does.
Put you on the spot there. Okay.
That's
All
okay.
right. I'll do the setup here with bootstrapping, and then I'll pass it off. So in those 4 buckets, this is just sort of generally when you think about sort of business, early stage idea, startup, more to a mature business. Bootstrapping and grants tends to be earlier stage. Debt and equity tends to come later, but there's exceptions to every rule. This is just sort of giving you a sense of what you might want to focus your time on more if you're early stage versus later stage. Bootstrapping itself is really defined as making as much progress with the business for the least amount of time and money. And before the business is a bona fide business, i.e., taking in money from customers, there may be anywhere from a few weeks to a few months to several years of sort of setup time, and you might be incurring costs to design the product and hire employees before you ship a product. It depends on the type of business, but when you're in that early stage, progress is really measured by how well you're sort of proving that the concept works, proving that there's demand for the product. And you generally want to do that on a small scale before you grow the business and buy the manufacturing facility, for example. We'll give some more examples on this as we go, but generally, if you can test out your concept on a small scale, again with the least amount of time and money, then you can usually make some important tweaks to your approach before you take out the big loan to buy the property, right? And then realize that, oh, actually, I need a different type of property because customers, now that I've built this thing and I'm shipping product, are telling me that they want something differently. So maybe an obvious statement, but in practice, there's a whole concept behind this called lean startup. And this next slide, there's a book that's called Lean Startup by Eric Ries, and I would highly recommend you check that out. This is sort of like how do you think about those early phases of testing your idea so that you have more conviction once you actually start spending a lot of money. And this testing is the formula. The book obviously has much more detail on it, but the formula is basically validate with what's called a minimum viable product to build a client base. Now, to use an example, let's say I was thinking about opening a bakery. When I think about the full vision of the bakery, I have a facility, I have equipment, I have employees, and of course, I've got delicious baked goods coming off of the line. In order to set that all up, there's a fair amount of cost and expense there. One way in which I could sort of follow the lean startup model in the early stages, i.e., do some bootstrapping, would be, all right, I'm not going to spend all that money and take all the time to build that facility right off the bat. I'm going to do this in the least amount of time and money possible. So I'm going to take my recipe for my delicious muffins, and I'm going to go, bake a few dozen in my home oven, and I'm going to take them to a local market. And per this slide, I'm going to try it out. I'm going to get out there, sell a few muffins, maybe even give them away if I have to. But the most important thing at this stage is just getting feedback. So someone tries my muffins, they think there should be more chocolate chips, or they don't like wheat flour, they want white flour, whatever. But I'm sort of slowly tweaking the recipe such that I'm realizing, okay, now after a few times of doing this, I'm getting more of a sense that there's a better recipe for me to follow, and that might then inform how I build the facility and hire the employees, and all those types of things. Maybe it's not muffins I should be making, but cinnamon buns, or maybe it's pizzas, right? So it could change pretty radically. But the point is, you start small, really validate the concept and go from there. When this is a workshop on funding your business. So when we're talking about this early stage hustle, it really is about saving you money, right? So you can make a lot of progress without having to go see Julie at the bank or come to talk to me at Main Venture Fund. And actually, it's really important that you do that, because when you do come eventually, if you do, to Julie or myself or anyone else, when you're ready for larger amounts of funding to buy the oven, the commercial oven, or buy the commercial space, the first thing we'll ask you is, well, what evidence do you have that this recipe makes sense and that people want your muffins? And you'll be able to say, well, over the last 12 months, I did some moonlighting, I did some contracting, I put the product in the window of the existing bakery down the street. I worked special events, and I got all of this feedback. And it's by extension of that idea, right? Like, you want to be able to make sure that you capture all this feedback. It's good, obviously you're going to be getting it maybe in places where you can't always write it down, but the more you sort of capture it in a form of data, the easier it is to share with others. So think about that too. You, despite the fact that you're at this stage, spending as little money as possible, you may find that you don't have the savings even for, a couple $100 or a couple $1,000 to be working the local, food show. And so you go to friends and family and you say, hey, I'm working on this really good chocolate muffin. Can I borrow some money from you? And that, as we saw in the previous slide, that happens a lot. That's a common source of capital. But just make sure, the point of this slide is make sure if you do that you have a contract in place that transcribes, how much did you borrow, on what terms, are you expected to pay this back, over what amount of time, are you not expected to pay it back, what happens if you decide that you don't want to do the business anymore. So that's something that ideally you have a lawyer who can look over your shoulder and help you generate those forms. There's also ways to find templates online, but whatever you do, don't leave it to a handshake, because there's just too many ways in which businesses can go sideways, and then it really could spoil a friend or a family relationship. And that also unfortunately happens a lot, but it can be easily mitigated if you're thoughtful about it. All right, a couple more bootstrapping slides, and then I'm going to switch gears over to Julie. So the last one here is crowdfunding. I mentioned this earlier, but there are lots of different crowdfunding approaches and lots of different sites. Generally, when you're crowdfunding, you do it through some online platform to facilitate sharing your idea with the masses and to take money in, and for you to organize, what you're promising in return. I guess you could do it manually, but it's much more efficient to do it through some of these platforms. I won't go into detail with them, but they're all slightly different, and they all are better or worse for different types of businesses. So again, Score has a good teaser on this. I think it's like a 20-page sort of PDF, and I highly recommend that if you're thinking about crowdfunding, to get off on the right foot, because there is a right way to do it and a less efficient way to do it. All right, I'm just going to check the chat window here. Okay, great. Welcome to those of you who have joined a little bit late. Now back to our 4 buckets here. We talked about bootstrapping, and I'll hand it over to Julie to talk about grants.
All right. So if you're thinking about these 4 different sources of money, and one of the slides we started out with saying there's no such thing as free money. Well, the difference between grants, and let's go to the next slide, Joe, the difference between grants and loans. Grants typically are what we call that free money. And I think from a practical matter, grants are very specific. They can require a match from you as the business owner, and they usually have a very specific objective. And I'll give you a couple of examples of grants that are out there today. For example, if you own a business here in Portland, you may have seen the City of Portland's Job Creation Grant Program. And there's a program out there that if you're creating jobs, you can apply to the city to receive a match of up to $10,000 per employee. But you have to hire the employee and fund that. Pretty impactful, though, if you are hiring employees in the city to be able to apply for something like this and receive $10,000 for your business. If your business is an exporter, through the Maine International Trade Center, there's a grant that you can apply for to help you kind of get all things together and ready for exporting. These are just 2 examples of places where you can go and get grants. But as you'll see in the next slide, it isn't all that it's cracked up to be. So grants, like we said, are that free money. And the loans are something that you will pay back. You'll pay back with interest. There's usually a down payment required and or some collateral. So if you've ever purchased a home or you've ever purchased a vehicle, there's the difference between the loans and the grants. And in this slide that Joe's just advanced, grants are super, super competitive. If you think about the world of college as an example, just like a scholarship, there's usually some type of foundation or government agency, like I said, the city or the SBA, and there's very specific goals. Grant writing is an art. There are people out there that is their sole profession, is being a grant writer. So, in the nuance of starting a new business, grant writing may not necessarily be the biggest source of capital for you. But do know anytime there's a grant and it's a grant related to business generation, they're usually going to be looking over your shoulder, and there'll be some type of checkbox that you'll have to either fill out or complete, so they know that you've either hired those employees or you've done whatever it is that you say that you're going to do. You're importing products and services. We can go to the next slide, Joe.
All right.
So
just a quick interjection here, Julie. So there's a couple of questions in the chat. One of them from Laura is a general question. This is back to crowdfunding. She says, I already started a GoFundMe and raised some capital. How do I accelerate this? Hard to say, Laura, without knowing exactly what your what the GoFundMe was and what you're working on. But in general, I would say, the rest of this workshop is really about types of funding beyond crowdfunding. So maybe there's probably, as you listen to this, maybe there's a natural sort of like, oh, a grant would make sense, or going to a bank would make sense. So if at the end you're still kind of asking that question, then maybe pipe up. And then Nathan asked, is there a certificate of completion? And thank you, Jasper, I see you just responded to that.
We do thank everyone for attending, but I don't believe our free workshops are continuing education credits.
Yeah, you get a verbal slap on the back from us. That's your certificate.
Yeah, basically.
For what that's worth. Okay, sorry, Julie, for interrupting, but I'll advance this, or I'll just leave it here and I'll let you know.
Yeah, you can go to the next. So I think, go to the next. There we go. So I think, as a banker, what I would say, Nathan, in this is the education is just so important. I have been in this role for, I don't want to tell you, 20 plus years at this institution. And the more knowledge you can gather about your business and the more knowledge you can gather about funding sources for your business, the better off that you will be. No, we don't offer continuing education credits in this area, but I mean it sincerely when I say financial literacy for your business is super important. And we'll talk about some of those specifics as we go forward. This slide here that we're showing you, you'll want to take a screenshot of, and you'll want to keep this when you get the slide deck coming back. These are some great local sources of funding. The Finance Authority of Maine they have this brand new portal on their app. It's called the Maine Funding Network. And it is a great tool for you to go in, fill out some information, and see if there's a match for you for some of this state and federal type funding. So bank lending is one piece of this puzzle, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But these organizations that are on this list are oftentimes what I as a banker call gap funding. These are the places that you may start when you are getting started with your business, and maybe your business isn't quite bankable yet, or doesn't quite make all the criteria for traditional bank lending, which again, we're going to talk about. But something like community concepts, something like the city or town that you do business. So please ask the question, where is your business doing business? If your business is doing business in the city of Portland, South Portland, Gorham, Auburn, there are lots of cities and towns that have their own economic development agency that provides loans, sometimes grants, and other type of funding assistance for your business as it's starting, growing, or launching in your city. So city and local government are a great idea. Community concepts, CEI, the Wicked Fast Loan Program. These are all fantastic places to explore as you're kind of going down the financing path. NTI does have loans and grants. Those businesses are very, so I think somebody in here was talking about AI. Maine NTI is a very technical driven type organization. And I've had businesses in the manufacturing area. I've had businesses in the computer science area use NTI for lots of different resources, as well as lending and grant opportunity. And FAIN is a state-run organization. You may have heard of them from student loan type things, but they have a direct, they do some direct lending, not as much. Usually they work through the banks. But again, this Maine Funding Network is a great place to log on to their portal, collect some information, and they will match you with some of these local lenders if your business is ready for these types of pieces. And then if your city or town doesn't have a specific program, something like the Greater Portland Council of Governments or the Southern Maine Finance Authority, and the Lewiston Auburn area, it's ABCOG, but these are regional-based organizations that have pools of money that are available to be lent to businesses. And sometimes as a banker, we'll combine. We'll use a little bit of this money, a little bit of bank money, and kind of pull together a stack of capital to help a small business grow, launch, or expand. So we can go to the next slide. This is a really important kind of snapshot of who some of the players are in our role. So I want to take a step back just for a second and have you think a little bit about financial institutions. Financial institutions are most often the place that people think about when it's like, I need to go get a loan, I need to fund my business. But I'm not going to ask you all to think for just a moment about your individual businesses and how you interact with your business money. How will your customers pay you? If yours is a business that has a wide reach, you're doing business from Portland, Maine, all the way out to Los Angeles, California, one of these national banks might be perfect for you. If your business is more regionally based, you're doing business here in the Greater Portland area, but you might also be doing business, say, throughout Southern New Hampshire or into Vermont. A regional bank might be a great use for you. But if your business is something that is very specific and based in, a local community, whether it's Portland, whether it's York County, whether it's Androscoggin County, Saginaw County, there are amazing community banks that you will want to look to and have a chance to discuss. So, if your business is very cash intensive, you may want to have access to a local branch. If your business doesn't have a lot of cash, and maybe you process credit cards, again, you may not have the need for that local touch. But what I will tell you from my years of experience, is that, for example, Internet Bank is a great bank if all you want to do is log on and say www.banking whatever and not have to interact with a live person. Your community banks, your credit unions, we are living, we are working, and we are lending in your communities. So in most cases, your loan applications are originated here, they're underwritten here, and by and large, in many institutions like mine, you're talking to a decision maker. So you want to be talking to somebody that you can express your business ideas to, you can review your business plan, your projection, your historical tax returns, and know that there's somebody that has an idea of kind of where you're doing business and what your operations are like. So I always ask businesses to think first, how do you interact with your money? And how will your money interact with your business? Choosing your banking partner wisely is so important. Changing banks can be very difficult. So finding that partner that you can do work with and hang on for the long term is really a super good recommendation. We can go to the next slide. I think I just said that. Choose your banking partner well. Applying for financing can take time. What I will tell you, you can log on to www.whatever-I-need-a-loan.com, and they may provide an instant decision for you. That may or may not be in your business's best interest. Understanding what interest rates are, understanding that it takes time, for example, sometimes to walk through that process. But different banks have different programs, different banks have different interest rates and have very different structures. And yeah, Jody, community banks deal in SBA lending. So community banks, for example, Gorham and some of those others that we listed there were mutuals. So we're like a credit union in that as a depositor, you're an owner of our institution. But the commercial banks, we pay taxes, the credit unions don't. But if you take a look to see who some of the top SBA lenders are in the state of Maine, banks like Gorham and Norway and others, and Bangor, we're right up there in top of SBA lending. So, SBA lending, and we'll talk some more about that as we go forward, is a niche. It's not for everybody, but thinking about your long-term relationship with your bank is super important, and finding a bank that you could feel comfortable with and that you can talk to somebody, that's my recommendation. Your business is its own unique entity, and trying to navigate the financial resources and the financial aspects. Maybe it's even online banking, finding an online banking tool that works well. Do you need remote capture to deposit checks? Again, how are your customers going to pay you? Will you all be paid by credit cards? Online resources can be super fast, can be super easy, but if you need help, you may not be able to find a resource who can help you navigate those individual nuances for your particular business. So let's go to the next slide, Joe. All right, so let's talk about, your business it's up, you're getting ready to launch, maybe it's established and you're expanding, maybe you're looking to purchase a business. So let's talk about what is specifically in a bank loan application. So, the majority of the banks, or all the banks that we listed up there, except for maybe the online ones, we're FDIC insured institutions, meaning the federal government has a certain expectation for how we're going to navigate the process of collecting information for you, making a decision, and then, either if we can't do the loan for you, explaining what that means, or as we go through the lending process, or go, apply for maybe SBA or FAME guarantees, helping you get all the way through to closing. So if any of you have ever purchased a home, applying for a business loan is pretty much like that, with some other details that we're going to walk into. Applying for a commercial loan at a commercial bank is not like walking into an automobile dealership when they say to you, oh, great, yeah, we have cars, what's your monthly payment? Commercial finance is not driven that way. It's not about the monthly payment. It's really understanding who your business is, what your business is going to do, and does it appear that through your prior history or through your plans and projections, does it look like your business is able to afford to repay this loan that you're seeking? So, elements of items in a bank application. If your business is new, if your business is expanding, if you're, in some cases, if the business that you're purchasing, the bank is going to ask for a business plan with complete financial projections. SCORE is an amazing source of help when it comes to creating a business plan and financial projections. And when I say financial projections, typically for SBA lending, you need a minimum of the first year is month by month. Years 2 and 3 can be annualized. And if you don't know what that means, that's okay. Sign up for SCORE Mentor and they can help you navigate that process. But what the bank is really looking to do is to dig in to say, okay, how are you generating revenue? What is your business plan? And then again, does it look like your business can actually afford to repay this loan that you're seeking? Your personal background and your resume should be part of your business plan. Who are you? What do you bring to the table? And what is your industry experience? I share dozens of these stories when I talk to folks about seeking traditional bank financing. If you have experience in the industry with which you are either establishing a business, growing a business, launching a business, buying a business, that is so important. Who you are, what you bring to the table, and what your experience is such a key part of the decision making when lenders are looking at your application. I tell a story that happened to me years ago. There's a gentleman who was a truck driver. He'd been driving a truck for decades, and there was a convenience store in his community he stopped at every morning to get a breakfast sandwich and a coffee. As he was nearing retirement for his trucking job, that business went up for sale. And he decided, you know what, I'm in there every day. I know the people, I'm going to buy it. He came to me to apply for financing, and I told him, no, I don't think this was a good idea. The business had been struggling. The sellers were of retirement age. They really didn't show that the business could demonstrate the requisite cash flow. And while this truck driver had visited this store every day for his entire trucking career, he had never worked in a convenience store, didn't even know how to make a cup of coffee. So for him to step in and take over this, he didn't have that requisite experience. He went to another bank made the loan, and about, I don't know, 12 months later, his business failed and the bank foreclosed. I happen to have a customer in the industry that kind of swooped in. We approved the financing for him to buy that business. He was in the industry, he had the experience. It was a great opportunity for him. So, while that may be kind of a roundabout story to say, if you don't have experience in this industry, maybe you've never owned your own business. But if you've worked in this industry, if you have management experience, if you have something that you're bringing to the table for your business, you're much more likely to secure bank financing by being able to articulate your story and be able to show you have what we call capacity to launch, grow, or successfully purchase a business. Your personal financial statement and your federal tax returns. If you've ever applied, like I said, to buy a mortgage, there's a whole application that you're going to fill out. Your personal financial statement is very similar to that. It's what do you own? What do you owe? And when the bank pulls your personal credit, what will we find on your personal credit report? The 3 years of your federal tax returns historically help to show us what your earnings have been. Have you ever owned any other businesses? Because what's important to the bank is, like I said, being able to kind of navigate this financial model. What does it cost to turn the lights on in your home? What does it cost to turn the lights on in this business that you're seeking financing? And how do all of those things kind of integrate together? Collateral is one of those words I think we mentioned earlier. Collateral is when you're purchasing a business, starting a business, or you have an established business that's seeking financing. That's what are the assets that are in your business. Do you have inventory? Is there an equipment list? Is there real estate? Accounts receivable aging, you may work in an industry where you complete a product or a service, you deliver it to your customer, and then you send a bill to your customer, and you have to wait 15, 25, 30, 45 days to get paid. That's an accounts receivable. Those are all assets that you can pledge to the bank in terms of collateral. If you are an entity, and I think there was an entity question in here somewhere, if you're coming to a bank to borrow money, your entity typically If it's not formed yet, it would need to be formed prior to closing, and you'd need an EIN, you'd need operating agreements and bylaws. And this is a really important step. If you're thinking about starting or buying a business, it's to work again with a local attorney. There's lots of www.something solutions to form your entity, just gather your entity. But when you need all of the documents that are behind it, it's usually really important, particularly if you have partners or others in this business with you, to work with a local attorney to help you pull those documents together. The last item on the list is the detailed sources and uses table. And I cannot tell you how important it is to be able to tell a lender how much money you need to borrow, and specifically, what will you be spending those loan proceeds on? The individual who comes to the bank says, I need to borrow $100,000 to start a business. Great. What are you going to spend it on? I don't know, working capital? That's probably not going to get your loan approved. So again, working with a SCORE mentor, working with the tools that SCORE has, they're able to help you navigate what is the business plan, what are your detailed sources and uses, and really help you think through this financial model. It's a pretty serious undertaking to apply for financing, and being able to walk through all of these pieces is a very important modeling perspective for you and your business to say, okay, does it look like, does it make sense? Is borrowing money really a good next step for my business? We can go to the next slide. All right, the 3 C's of credit. Yeah, this is always a fun one. This is like the banker geek in me is going to come out right now. There are some people that'll tell you there's 3 C's, 5 C's, 10 C's, whatever. I try to keep it super simple. We've talked a little bit about it in the last slide, but basically when you're working with a lender, the lender wants to know, what is the business cash flow? What collateral do you have to pledge? And lastly, we talked about this in the other slide, what is your character and what is your capacity in order to be able to execute the business plan and the lending strategy? So cash flow really comes down to a couple of key pieces. If your business is established, the bank is going to look backwards to say, okay, over the last 2 to 3 years, and including year to date of 2024. So example, if you're coming to apply for a loan today and your business had been in business for a couple of years, I'm going to ask you for your last couple of years of corporate tax returns, and I'm going to ask you for year to date 2024, because I want to check in to see how have you done and how are you doing this year. If there's expansion, we're going to ask you for projections. But basically what we're looking for in those financials is to say, okay, here's the business, here's the revenue, here's the expenses, here's the profitability. Now, based on that profitability, does it look like the business can afford the payments? So we're going to look at your business and we're going to look at you. So on the business side, what the banks typically like to see is what we call a debt service coverage ratio of 1.2 to 1.35 times. So kind of think about, again, if you've ever applied for a mortgage, you've probably heard a lender talk to you about debt to income ratio. Debt service coverage ratio is debt to income ratio for your business. So if you say, net income, gross revenues less all of your expenses, and there's a net income, there's some things that we add back that are non-cash expenses. And that's kind of what the free cash flow is, to say, okay, does it look like this business can afford to make payments on a loan? So, a term loan is a loan that is, maybe has a 3, 4, or 5 year repayment stream. A line of credit might be interest only based. But we're looking at those calculations to see, does the business generate enough revenue? And then after its expenses, can it make loan payments? And that can be on a projection basis. But typically, these ratios, if your business is not profitable, if you don't have any outside income in your home or your household, then you're showing negative cash flow. And from traditional lending perspective, negative cash flow is something it doesn't look like your business is able to afford, or you are able to afford to borrow money and make payments. Collateral, I think we talked a little bit about. Collateral can be business assets, they can be personal assets. The SBA has very specific guidelines in terms of how the bank will look at business assets or personal assets to use for collateral. But think through, you know, when you buy a home, you sign a mortgage. Your mortgage is the collateral for the home loan when you purchase a home. When you buy a car, you sign the title. And again, if you for some reason don't make your car payments, you know, your lender can repossess your car. The bank on the business loan side is looking for similar things, but again, typically it comes first from your business assets, and then if there's a shortfall, it may come through your personal assets. We've talked a lot about what your prior industry experience and what your prior business ownership is, but one piece that we haven't talked about is your personal credit history and your reputation and your sort of integrity in this industry. If you don't know what your personal credit score is and you're thinking about approaching a bank for traditional lending, you should go and double check and find out. You know, go to a Google search for your name or your business idea. I had a gentleman one time who had a very large ask, and I did a Google search before he came, and just simple Google search before he came in my office. And this gentleman had a lengthy criminal record in areas that would be problematic for the SBA and other financial institutions. So thinking about who you are, who your business is, and then in small business lending, we're bringing those two things together. So doing your homework first is super important. We can jump into the next screen. Next slide, please. Very quickly, these are the places that you can go and take a look to see what your credit score is. Typically, we say 700 or better. There's some financial institutions that'll say 650, 625, but I usually say to folks, 700 is a great place to start. If it's below 700, understand why and be able to articulate why to a lender. Go to the next slide, please, Joe. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the SBA. I am very fortunate. I've had the chance to do SBA lending for many, many years. I've been a recipient of many of those awards, and Gorham is a top SBA lender here in the Greater Portland community. I could not do my job without the SBA. They are a tremendous partner. They are not a direct lender. You come to the bank goes to the SBA once your approvals are completed to get what's called a guarantee. The SBA has programs that will provide the bank anywhere from 50 to 80%, like insurance, if you will, based on the loan amount. But there are many, many, many SOPs to SBA lending. The SBA has a great site. You can go to the SBA.gov website. You can request a lender match. You can fill out all kinds of information about your business, and it'll go out to all of the SBA lenders who are receiving lender matches. They'll opt in, opt out. It'll come back to you with a list of lenders in your area that are interested in talking to you about your project. So if you're thinking about an SBA loan, I encourage you to visit the SBA.gov website. But on that note, there's what's called the 7A program, and there's the SBA 504 program. The SBA 504 program is for real estate or equipment purchases. So if you are buying a building for your business, if you're a real estate investor, you can't do any 7A lending. 7A lending is meant for owner-occupied projects, meaning your business is the one who is the borrower and also is going to occupy the real estate or use the equipment. So typically, depending on what it is you're doing, whether you're starting a business, purchasing a business, expanding a business, the minimum injection from you, the business owner, is usually somewhere to 10 to 20% of the total project cost. So a couple of slides back, I asked you about your sources and uses. And this is where a lot of this is generated. How much do you need to borrow? Where are all the categories going to go? Are you going to buy equipment? Is there leasehold improvements? Is there working capital? Understanding what all those components are drives what your injection needs to be as comparison to the loan amount. So if you need to borrow $100,000, you may be required to put in a minimum of $10,000 of your own funds to contribute to the total project cost. The SBA 7A process has changed dramatically. They had a big SOP change a year ago, August, to make it be a lot more user-friendly for the bank and a lot more user-friendly for you as the borrower. Not every business is an SBA borrower, Not every industry is an SBA borrower. Not everyone is eligible for SBA borrowing. But if it's something you're thinking about, visit their website and please get yourself connected with a lender in the community who knows how to do SBA lending, and they'll help you navigate the process. Again, there's lots of www.something SBA lenders out there. In my experience, it's an avenue, it's an approach, but in terms of interest rates and terms and conditions and fees and support, they're typically just in the business to collect the loan, not to help you with deposits or not to help you with credit card processing. Did somebody have a question? Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide, Joe. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about, and I think I've given you some indications of things that banks typically won't fund. So I get really, really passionate when I hear people say, access to capital is non-existent. Access to capital is non-existent. It's not true. I fund startups at this institution. I have worked with startups my entire career. However, if you don't have any prior experience, particularly, maybe if you don't have any collateral, if your personal credit isn't good, if you're looking to seek bank financing, or if you're looking to seek investors, you really have to put in the time and the effort and the work, whether it's through a SCORE mentor or others, to really understand the process. Many times people have really, really creative ideas and say, oh, there isn't one of these within 100 miles of where I live. It's possible. But being able to tell the lender the who, the what, the when, the where, the why is super important. And if you don't have any of your own funds to put in, or if you're looking for 100% financing, or if your business doesn't cash flow, or you have ongoing losses, or there's a story from the past, those aren't things often that will get you into traditional lending. But if you're working with a banker that understands the process, they may be able to help you figure out what is a good next step. If your business is expanding and you don't have a plan, that financial piece of budgeting and projections is just super important. As a banker, we don't want to push you into a loan that it looks like you or your business cannot afford. And I mean that genuinely. So helping you navigate the process, trying to figure out what is the right type of loan, the right space for the loan, the right kind of loan, it takes a little bit of time to figure that out. You need to put in a little bit of effort, as well as working with your banker to do that. And one of the things you'll always see when you're signing loan documents is that when you're seeking a business loan, your business loan is spent for business proceeds. It's not for personal expenses. So being sure when you're working on your financial statements that your financial statements are clean and clear. Your QuickBooks is showing what are the revenues and the expenses of your business, not your personal expenses, is super, super important. And again, this cash flow insufficient for debt service, we are really trying to make our educated guess to say, based historically or based on your projections, it looks like you and your business, yes, it looks like you can afford, or no, I think this is a little bit aggressive right now. Here are some other avenues or opportunities to get you to that space. Borrowing for your business is the next level in your business. You'll have to be concerned about, how do you turn the lights on at home? How do you turn the lights on in your business? And being able to bring those two pieces together, that is an added stress to your business to make those monthly payments. So making sure that you're prepared and ready is just a super, super important strategy. Okay, so I think the next slide is going to take us into equity. I don't see any questions, Joe, but
there is one question, a good question from Tingna, and this is a good question for you, Julie. It says, what's the best way for a newcomer to build up their personal credit?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I think oftentimes it is working with your, sort of your personal banking relationship in your financial institution, getting a bank account open, started, and having that be successful without overdrafts, without return checks. Maybe it's applying for a personal credit card. And it might just be a small credit card to get started, but those are ways that you can start to build a good credit history so that you begin to have a personal credit report. You know, it's interesting. I had an application that just went through underwriting the other day, and there's two that we're going through. One, when the Personal Credit Bureau came back, it was a momentary pause. In this case, this particular person who owned the business had every credit card you can imagine. I mean, from every store to every, I mean, just, it was crazy how many credit cards this particular person had. But the interesting thing was they all had zero balances. Their credit score was I don't know, in the mid 700s, which is not bad. But one of the things that the credit bureau said was they actually had too much credit available to them and too much open. So, you know, versus the other one that came through, the borrower had very little debt, had a few payments outstanding, and their credit score was very high. So the trick is finding the balance, but definitely getting set up with a credit card to start, you know, having those payments. Maybe in some of the credit unions, you know, getting your first car loan and having those payments show so that you're starting to build an on-time credit history is an important way to get started. Can I elaborate on the 504 program?
Yeah.
Yep. I love the SBA 504 program. So I'm glad you asked. The SBA 504 program is, like I said, it's for commercial real estate or it is for equipment. So for example, if your business is buying a building and it will occupy at least 51% of the square footage, you may be eligible for an SBA 504 loan. If you need to buy significant equipment for your business, you may also be eligible for an SBA 504 equipment loan. So those programs typically work 50, 40, 10 on a traditional basis. So the bank provides a 50% loan, the SBA debenture will be the 40% loan, and the 10% will be your equity injection. However, equity injection varies, and it varies depending on the type of collateral. So for example, there are some special purpose properties. Sometimes it's in hospitality, sometimes it's in gas stations, sometimes certain classes of commercial real estate. Or if your business hasn't been in business for 2 years or more, or if you're purchasing a business and you don't have any, so like if you own a business, you're going to buy another business, you're going to buy real estate. Sometimes you can't always get in at that 10% down. So my point is, if you're thinking of the SBA 504 program, you want to work with your banker to determine, are you eligible for a minimum of 10% down? And on the 504 program for real estate, you can do, you can purchase, you can renovate, and all of that can get rolled in. So at closing, for example, the bank does all of the funding at closing. And the SBA loan is what's called a debenture. It is something that's sold out in the secondary market. But at closing, the bank does all the funding. If there's construction, the bank monitors all the construction. We collect all the certificates of occupancy. We get everything done. The appraiser goes back out and certifies that your construction is completed to plans and specs. And then we work with what's called a certified development company to get your debenture funded and out in the secondary market. The beauty of the SBA 504 program is that for the bank has what's called a 50% loan to value. The SBA and that debenture is usually either 35 or 40%. And that is a fixed rate loan to maturity. Whole other conversation, but as a borrower in this interest rate environment, having predictable payments on equipment, it's 10 years. On real estate, it's either 20 or 25 years, is a super, super strong benefit. And if your business is eligible to get in at 10% down, particularly in a growing business, being able to save some of that working capital to go into your business versus a down payment, it's very impactful. So what I always say to folks on the 504 program, it is like 7(a) lending. There's lots of different pieces that you have to navigate to find out if you're eligible, if your project is eligible, and then what your down payment would be. So do work with a lender that has experience in that field. We work with a certified development company that's based out of Portsmouth, and they are amazing. They treat our customers the way we treat our customers, and the experience is seamless. So your bank approvals are done at the bank. Everything's collected and navigated through the bank, and then it gets sent to the 504 for those folks to get your SBA approval. So I think if that answers all of your questions on the 504, the bank is responsible for all of the funding up front, and then we help you get your debenture funded. And then you, as the borrower, has to bring, depending, it's either 10, 15, or 20%, depending on your eligibility criteria. I've done tons of 504s. I love the program.
All right. Well, let's finish off with equity here. This is, and obviously keep the questions coming. And again, for those of you who weren't there at the beginning, we'll have some Q&A at the end here. So we'll leave some space for that. Equity is probably, so when you look at these four primary ways to fund a business, everyone will do bootstrapping. Probably some will do grants. Maybe most will do debt. Very few will do equity. Equity is, you hear about sort of the term private equity, which basically means buying part ownership in a business. And the private piece of it is in buying part ownership of a private business. If it was public equity, another term for that is stocks, right? So we're all familiar with buying stocks on E-Trade. You can buy stocks on Amazon. And when you buy stock in Amazon, you are buying part ownership of that company, a very small ownership share, usually, if you're an investor. But with private equity, you're essentially buying stock in private companies. And whether or not you are what's called an angel investor or a venture capital investor like Main Venture Fund, or you're just a friend of the business and you want to write a check and own a small portion of the company, that's all forms of private equity. And that's all well and good, except that when it comes down to the nitty gritty of what does it mean to be part owner of a company, there's a lot of questions that come out of that. Like, do I, as a part owner of the company, share in the decision making at the management level in the company? As the company makes money, what level, if any, of the profits am I entitled to as part owner? And there's, I guess, I would say, as a general statement, a lot more complexity than something like what you're used to with a loan, where obviously there's a lot of upfront work to make sure you qualify for the loan, but once it's set, how long it's going to take to pay off, your monthly payments, your interest rate for the most part, assuming it's a fixed interest rate. And then by the end of, once the loan is paid off, there is no more obligation between the lender and the borrower. Whereas buying part ownership, you're in the business, and sometimes right up front in the passenger seat with the owner of the business for the lifetime of that business. So getting to this, so that's, I just paint that picture because I think venture capital in particular, but also angel investing, private equity in general has maybe a certain intrigue for people, but the complexity is such that it's not a fit for most businesses, like I said. And most business owners, especially if they started their business to be autonomous, to call the shots, some of them may not want another person or organization helping them to make decisions. The businesses that it works well for are businesses that are really capital intensive, that need to hire a lot of people, make big investments well before any product is gonna come off the line, and they may need to hire a bunch of people before they have really any collateral. In other words, like a location or cars or things like that a bank would need to lend against, and so they may not be able to get a loan, and so they come to an angel investor like me and they say, we want an investment. We're willing to give up part ownership of the company to get this early money in to help us build to a point where we can get a loan or get to market with a product and start earning income. I'm taking the liberty of sharing a lot of things that aren't necessarily on this slide, but I'm touching on a number of these things. So just to orient it back to the slide, some of the jargon that I warned you about up front, angel investors are individuals who are making equity investments in private companies. Venture capital groups are essentially just a pool of investors, of money, of investor money that's come together and it's invested out of that pool. So Main Venture Fund is a venture capital fund. Our pool is state money. And so we're making investments in Maine-based companies, but every venture capital fund will have its own focus. So some of them are only investing in manufacturing companies or only investing in biotech companies. So you'd have to do a little bit of research to understand what they're focused on. And needless to say, equity investment is really high risk. It's not like public equities in that sense that there's an established company like Amazon that has many revenue streams, and it's got a long history of performing well. With private companies, especially companies that are pre-revenue, or maybe even just an idea, right? It's highly risky that business will make it all the way through to profitability. The sentence we use often, the investment target is hyper-growth businesses in a sort of differentiated product service with exit orientation, generally not family businesses. That term exit orientation means that in order for an equity investor to be paid back with a return, the company needs to have some event in the future, usually it's 5 to 10 years in the future, where a new investor is coming in and buying a big slice of the pie, if not the whole company. At that point, the early investors get paid back, but until that happens, there is no promise of a return. So when equity investors make their investment, they are implicitly agreeing with the owner that in some time frame, again, usually 5 to 7 years, that owner is planning to sell the business to a new buyer who's going to take it to the next level. And that also is another reason why equity may not be a good fit if you're a founder who wants to hold on to your business for the long term. Last thing I'd say is, I mentioned that, I tried to articulate how businesses either do or do not fit the equity profile. It's also a fairly, complex funding cycle. So Julie did a really great job of explaining the types of things you'd need to bring to a bank to help them make a decision to loan. And those are, similar things for equity investors. We'd want to see all the financials and the history as well. And also we'd want to see the forward projection, those types of things. It could take as long as 6 months. So it's quite a long slog. But there are, large amounts of capital available depending on the type of business and the stage that you're at within equity. So that's one of the reasons to do it. I explained a lot of this. I think there's two things I'd point out on this slide. One, just like I mentioned earlier, when you're taking capital from friends and family, whether it's a loan or whether it's equity, you want to make sure to document it really, really carefully. And again, the point here is whether it's friends and family, whether it's a venture fund, whether it's angel investors, there's a lot of documentation that comes along with it. A lot of it is sort of standardized, but the legal costs for just having the written agreement can be anywhere from 10 to I've seen over $100,000 for one deal, and that might be to bring in $3, $5, $10 million into the company. So these are sort of big numbers that we're talking for the most part. The second point from the slide is the bottom. Venture Deals as a book is a really great primer for founders to understand what types of terms are you signing up for when you are going out for equity investment. And it's written in a way that if you don't have a lot of experience in venture is still accessible. So we recommend that highly for those of you who are interested. And that's pretty much it on the equity side. There's some concluding remarks here. Generally, we've reiterated the point here that there's lots of different sources of cash. Businesses generally need outside cash to grow, but not always. We should say, you can bootstrap your way through to sustainable profits, and some businesses do that. Almost all of them do need at least a little bit of personal investment or friends and family to kind of get started. But it's not to say that you necessarily need to go to a bank or come to me at Main Venture Fund. That's a minority of businesses that are able to do that. But think about that too. And if you can design your business in a way to avoid needing to get outside capital, it can be a nice way to focus your efforts. But these all, depending on the type, there's upsides and downsides. We tried to articulate some of those during the conversation. I think bootstrapping, we show that as sort of early stage, and certainly it's, highly recommended at the early stage, but it actually, as a theory, it can really carry through the whole life cycle of your business. Even once you're profitable, there are lots of ways to bootstrap, and, introducing a new product, or even just sort of thinking about your business in a really sort of ruthlessly efficient way. Is there a way to fund something in a more creative way than going out and getting an extra loan, or coming to an equity investor? So we love bootstrapping. We recommend that. But obviously oftentimes there's many of these different types of buckets that come into play in parallel when you're running and growing a business. Julie, do you want to talk to this slide? This is one of our outro slides.
Absolutely. This is another just super, super great resource guide for you to think about the whole funding process. As Joe mentioned, bootstrapping to the maximum. I mean, there are businesses that I have worked with over my career that have never borrowed a dime, but keep a working capital line of credit handy for just in case. Their businesses are profitable, they're growing, and those profits sustain its growth. However, if you're thinking about a business that, that is not necessarily an option, this slide gives you kind of the natural progression of what Joe and I see, what Joe and I recommend, and how we've kind of navigated, our careers in this space. And something else that I think is just kind of fun that we haven't mentioned, and this is sort of in this grant space, but if you look at some of the pitch competitions and some of the programs, for example, tonight is Launchpad, from Gorham Savings Launchpad. But if you look here, Maine Center for Entrepreneurs has a top grant program. The SBA has an Emerging Leaders program every year. Dirigo Labs, the RU residency program, Greenlight Maine, CEI. I mean, there are so many resources for you as a small business owner here in the state of Maine and Greater Portland. Don't ever feel like you're operating in a vacuum. Do reach out to these groups, depending on your industry, depending on where you're located, to see what particular areas of expertise they have. The list of workshops that SCORE offers is tremendous. And sometimes, even if it's just, while you're grabbing your lunch or in your car listening, these things are phenomenal. So I think, the space that we operate in here in this Greater Portland or the state of Maine has such great access to people, great access to folks who have expertise. And if your business is ready to launch, it's ready to grow, and it's viable, there are some tremendous resources that you can access to help you get to that next step. And you'll see in the bottom piece here, there are some industry specific ones. And again, I don't remember if all the industries were represented here. But working through, these, cruising, just taking a look at these websites as you're trying to, kind of navigate your search, there's some great resources out there that can help you. And we also don't talk about exporting a lot, and that's something that the SBA has been really giving lenders a lot of education on. If your business is a business that's going to be exporting, and even to Canada, that's exporting, there's resources there too. Next slide, Joe, or is that wrapped up for us? Yeah, I think that wraps us up.
Yeah, I think you'll get an email from SCORE with the deck, and there's a evaluation, but we really appreciate everybody showing up. Jasper, do you have any last comments? Close us out.
Yeah, we greatly appreciate you guys. Every time you put this on, it's invaluable information for anyone looking to, operate their small or large business. I think that it shines a light on very, deep topics that can be, kind of scary for some people. And we're always happy to have you guys put this on. Before we go, are there any other questions from anyone? Uh, just a lot of people saying thank you, saying the same thing, insightful on Denise with a great comment, insightful on how, incredibly insightful, and hope to discuss how to leverage debt in an effective way. And people enjoying it.
Good. Yeah.
Oh,
And just one last plug, if you want to drill down into any of these areas, the Score mentors are a great place to start. And
absolutely.
we do these workshops roughly once a quarter. And there's obviously a bunch of other different types of workshops, but highly recommend a Score mentor. I've had one, I've been one, super, super helpful, and the price is right, meaning there is no fee. So it's really helpful.
And
Yeah,
asking the questions up front is just so important. I think sometimes, like I said, I get really passionate when people say, "Oh, there's no access to capital." There is, but it takes work. And as I said a moment ago, there's a tremendous group of resources in this area to help you navigate the process. So do reach out. You've taken the first step by coming here today for about an hour or so to learn, but we're more than happy at SCORE to help you dig a little deeper and help find what is a good avenue for your business.
yeah, we absolutely are. And if you don't already have a mentor and you're a part of this presentation, you can just head right to score.org. You already were there to register for this. It's the next tab over, find a mentor. You can either be matched by zip code or peruse our available mentors. It's free, as we said. It's also completely confidential and it can be one-on-one. We have co-mentors throughout the country as well as that can help with any topic for the life of your business. And want to thank you guys again for the presentation today. Always very insightful.
Thanks, Jasper. Thanks,
And
everyone.
thank you guys
Thanks,
again.
everybody. Have a great
Have a great
afternoon.
day. Well, please head to the website, Kathleen. That's how we book all of our appointments is score.org. All right. Have
Thanks,
a good
everyone.
one, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.